Welcome to another episode of the brand called You. Today we have a very, very accomplished lady, Dr. Shalini Lal, with us. Shalini, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being here. Shalini is from St. Stephen's. She's from IIM Ahmedabad. She went to UCLA and to Wharton, some of the top business schools and educational institutions. You worked for Mafoy, Bharti, Escorts, Deutsche Bank, Infinity. You're a board member of IIM-Jammu, and now you're a very, very successful author. My God, what an amazing track record. And you did all this after doing economics and then moving to organizational development. So shall we talk to us a little bit about your early life and what made you take all these choices?
Thank you. So thank you, Ashutosh, for having me. It's just so wonderful to be here. When I was growing up, this was the 80s and pre-liberalization. It was still, a time of scarcity. So if you were a good student, to be honest, you didn't really even exercise your judgment very much. You sort of went to the best rated place which accepted you. So I had no idea about economics till I joined Stephens. I had actually PCMB, and I was dreadful at bio, and I didn't want to do medicine. So eco was a default choice, but I loved it. I absolutely loved it. But when it came to doing a master's, econometrics was a little bit scary for me, and the common belief at that time was that if you can get into an IIM, then that's the most smart move from a career perspective. Yeah. So I didn't really have much, frankly, thought, into what course did I do, even what college did I go to, either Stephens or IIM Ahmedabad. They were all considered at that time, the place to go if you got into. So I joined because I got into it. So that's about it. Yeah. But things changed once I was there. I got into Ahmedabad fairly early. So I had just turned 20. So, I was really, really young. And one thing I knew was that from here on, I want to have more of a choice and it to be something that I really want to do and not just something I've managed to get into and therefore, land up doing. Yeah. So we had a program at IIM Ahmedabad called Explorations in Roles and Identity, which is a really interesting course. You go off on, sort of a resort where you're cut off from all outside communication, and a group of 35 students with about 4 or 5 faculty members just talk for about 10 days. So it's such an unusual program design. But through the course of that, people come up with insights that very often transform their lives. So when I went through that, and I didn't speak through the entire 10 days because I was just so busy taking in all that was happening. But when I came back, I said, okay, this is it. This is what I want to do. Okay. So after that, everything has been far more, well thought out, and there's been a lot of me visible in the choices after that.
So after IIM Ahmedabad, it was moved towards organizational
development. In fact, at a time when nobody used to take gap years, like even the word did not exist actually in our vocabulary, I did do that. Okay. So Ahmedabad had this very nice policy that if you want to explore an area, whatever you think your heart is in, then you can come back for placement the next year. Okay. And I came back to Delhi to work with one of the faculty members of that program who operates out of Delhi as his research associate to, sort of make sure that this was indeed what I wanted to spend my life doing. And it is, and it has been, and none of that has ever changed. So that's what I did. And then I went back to campus and I took placement with Titan. Titan was the first organization I joined. So I guess once you discover what's,
your passion.
Everything changes from there.
So I'm going to ask you a silly question. A lot of our viewers would probably want to know that also. What is the difference between organizational development and human resources?
Actually, a lot of people do ask me that.
They do? Okay.
Yeah. So I'll tell you. In business school, there's this course called organizational behavior. and which is all about, how do people behave in organizations, and then how do organizational subsystems behave, like teams, like larger groups of people, or even organization-wide.
Mm-hmm.
So organizational development is the application of organizational behavior. Whereas HR is a lot about processes around people, so recruitment, training, appraisals, etc. So HR, in a sense, is far more process-driven, and it's like it's further down the application stream. Organizational development says, okay, how do we make an organization effective? How can we use insights from behavioral sciences and the entire spectrum of behavioral sciences? So you have psychology, sociology, anthropology, social psychology, each providing insights that are useful when you're designing an organization. So that's what really.
And in large organizations, I assume these will be different departments.
No, they aren't, which is the strangest part. So when I finished, I said I want to work in OD. But there are no roles. So when I joined Titan, in fact, the natural fit for someone who's inclined towards OD lands up being training, learning and development. So, they tend to go down that path. But they're very rarely pure OD roles. Okay. That's a bit of a pity, actually.
I agree. And where did you do your doctorate from, and what was your thesis on?
So my whole PhD happened mid-career. I'd already been working for 11 years. And at the time when I left, I was heading OD for Bharti Televentures, the group. But I had a very strong desire to have deep expertise, whatever that deep expertise meant. And I didn't really know what it meant, except that I thought, okay, somewhere you have to study something far more. And I love learning. So applied to UCLA. At that time, there was a book called Built to Last. You may have heard. So Professor Jerry Porras actually worked at Stanford, and Bill Ochi had written this book on Theory Z. So because I had done a lot of work on transformation of Indian organizations before that, so when I shared some of that, they said, okay, why don't you come and work with us? So both Professor Bill Ochi and Professor Porras were my doctoral advisors. Went to UCLA to study what makes organizations adaptive and how do you create successful transformation.
Wow.
So that became, and still is perhaps, I think, my core super specialty, if you like.
I agree. So when I was reading about you, you said that you're passionate about building better organizations. I'd love to understand from you, how do you define better?
Yeah, so there are two levels of answer to that. One is what I would give a business leader, which is simply that you want to do ABC, whatever that ABC is. You want to do, this is your strategy, this is your vision for your organization. If you don't have the right internal organization, it's not going to happen.
Right.
And very often, in fact, because founders, entrepreneurs are very good at getting business, and that their primary strength is seeing the opportunity, getting the business, they don't often pay enough attention to, but do I have the organization which will consistently deliver the outcomes needed to do well in whatever that is, they've chosen. So if it was a business leader, I'd say a better organization is one which will get you where you want to go.
Okay.
But I also have my own definition, and a part of that, and they're connected, is a better organization is one where people are genuinely able to bring out the best in themselves. So they're places where people are able to express their potential, their talents, in ways that, of course, will help the organization accomplish what it has to. But in a sense, there's a slight humanistic angle beyond the instrumentality of the end. So,
and how would you evaluate if an organization has gone from good to better in just the bottom line, or will it be
the ease by which it can do what it wanted to do? So, for instance, most of my assignments are like that. So if I work with a business leader, the business leader says, okay, this is our ambition. We want to do X, Y, Z, A, B, C, rule this world, rule that world in 2 years usually. Then, immediately the question becomes, okay, so what's the internal organization which will get you there? And I focus on 4 areas. So I look at, do you have the leadership team for that? Does the leadership team have the capabilities, for instance? is it a team? Because sometimes it's not a team,
Yeah.
it's just a collection of people.
Yeah.
But is it a team? So are you getting the synergies which you would get if you have a well operating team? So look at the leadership, look at what's the culture like. Do the behaviors which the culture encourage, do those behaviors serve your strategy? Because they don't always, sometimes your culture is pulling you in one direction,
Yeah.
and the behaviors you need for your strategy are actually something completely different. So in a sense, when an organization is well designed internally and is a good fit for its strategy, it's just going to go smoother. It's like everything's lubricated. It's working well with it, as a whole. All the pieces are interconnected with an underlying logic, which is very different from an organization which is great aspirations but just can't get its act together because some of these critical pieces, leadership, culture, design of the organization or organization-wide capabilities, are not able to come together. So
that's true. So one of the challenges I used to face when I was building Guardian was culture. And we had 1,200 people at our peak, and it used to be a big challenge on how do you communicate, how do you build culture, or what the culture is when the organization is new. What are your thoughts on building culture for a startup?
See, the truth is that you will be building culture whether you're aware of it or not.
Correct.
It's almost like parenting. You can, even if you abdicate being a parent and say you're not a parent, you are being a parent.
Correct.
And the kid is learning from you whatever it is that they are learning.
Right.
So you can either be conscious about what you're teaching the kid, or the kid will anyway learn.
Right.
So it's almost exactly the same with culture. It's impossible not to create a culture. So random decisions which a business leader will take through the day, like even as trivial as where should our office premises be? What should the office be designed like? What should a pharmacy, in your case, what should be the feel of the premises, which you would think, oh, what has this got to do with culture? But no, they're all interconnected because there's a philosophy which is guiding those choices. So trivial or not so trivial, like who's going to be in your leadership team? What kind of behaviors will you encourage? What will you say a firm absolutely no to?
Correct.
So without knowing it, you will, and any other founder, any other business leader will be creating a culture. Now, if you are conscious of it, then it opens many possibilities, because then it's something that you can very consciously guide, because you will be guiding it in two ways. One, the random acts which you're going to do every day. And that's, in the end, the most powerful method is just that. People are always watching a business leader to say, what does he think? What does he like? What does he not like? What can we do? What can we not do? If I do X, will I get promoted? If I do Y, will I be chucked out? So they're always looking at the leader for, okay, where is his head? What should I be doing? So anyway, you will be doing that. If you're conscious of it, then you will say, okay, fine. So what are the messages I'm giving? And am I consistent, in that? And sometimes it's not easy at all, because particularly if you're a fast-growing business, and I mean, who am I talking to? You've done this so many times. You're faced with choices which are not easy.
True.
Because a choice which is good for your culture, and sometimes you might think, okay, good for your business, in a sense, you feel in that moment that there are many trade-offs, that should I really worry about culture, but this will make sense for a business. But actually...
But I'll give you an interesting example of where culture failed me. When I started Guardian, I had come from a culture of ITC. And, when I joined ITC, now talking of 40 years ago, there was nothing called casual leave, medical leave, right? You used to get 30 days annual leave. If you were sick, you were sick. The company trusted you. So when I founded Guardian in 2003, I told the HR head, she came and asked me, how much leave? I said, leave is earned leave. What about casual? I said, why should we have casual leave? If someone is sick, they're sick. And that backfired so badly, because suddenly we found people were sick. And it was so easy to get a medical certificate. And then we had to start changing culture at that stage.
Yeah,
But
I can understand.
but it was a big learning experience for me.
Yeah, and I can imagine your challenge because ITC was such a strong foundation and it's a strong organization with a very strong internal people philosophy.
Yeah.
Like it, don't like it, but it's very much
Mhm.
there, and it shapes you over
Correct. Correct.
so many years.
Correct. This inherent trust that you have in everybody
Absolutely
comes out of the
Yeah.
security
Yeah.
large organizations provide.
Yes.
Isn't it? That's true. So, what are some of the basic mistakes startup entrepreneurs make when they are setting up with regard to people policies or development of the organizations? And today there are startups
Yeah.
mushrooming everywhere.
Such a good question. 5 people will start the same business differently, as of course you know that, and we all know that. How consistent can you be in the way you design? And I think the biggest challenge, definitely for a startup, because everything is new, but also even later when you're a business leader who's just come in, is to have an underlying internal philosophy that's tying everything together. Because if you have that internal logic, an internal consistency to your messaging, which will then reflect in the people you hire, how you choose to give them, even who you will hire will affect the kind of leave policies, will affect so there's an internal logic which is needed. If each of these are treated as one decision here, one decision there, without necessarily an underlying logic, in a sense it's not very different from strategy. And strategy is what the organization does in the outside world, right? And just as strategy, a successful strategy, is as much about what you choose as what you choose not to do when everybody else is doing what you choose not to do. It's almost exactly the same with building a great organization. It's as much about what you choose to do as what you say you will not do, because it's in those choices that the real values get revealed. And it's not easy to make those choices, either in the outside world in strategy or in the inside world of the organizations, because a choice sometimes feels like you're giving something up in the moment, and that's never so simple to do. So I would say that the biggest mistake any business leader, but particularly perhaps an entrepreneur, would make is be clear on what your philosophy is. Because if you live that, you will find the right people. By the way, they always exist. Just like you will find the market for whatever your brand is.
Correct.
If you're consistent with it, right? It's almost the same thing. You will find the right people if you are sure that you are going to be absolutely consistent and you're going to follow it, in everything. So it's almost like an internal strategy.
You said this so well. I was talking to an American friend whose company does business in China and India, and I said, what is the difference between working with Chinese and with Indians? And he said that, it's very difficult to get a Chinese businessman to say yes. And it's very difficult to get an Indian businessman to say no.
I know.
So that seems to percolate even within our organizations.
That's
very difficult to say.
Yeah. Very, very true.
Very interesting. So when startup entrepreneurs are building their organizations, they obviously have heard a lot about defining culture, about how to build culture, and you've said, of course, that like a parent, you're defining culture every moment that you're building it. But what are some of the things one should watch out for when you're building an organization as you define culture?
So here are some giveaways. If you find that the kind of people who are rising in your organization and are doing well in your organization are not the kind of people who match your philosophy, then there is some pieces are not adding up. And that's like a sign that it's not, something is not quite working. Because if everything internally is, like perhaps in ITC, that if you weren't an ITC person in terms of values, you were probably not going to be in the leadership team of ITC, right? You would have gotten weeded out at some point. If you have a strong internal consistency, you will find the kind of people you want being successful, actually being successful. if you find that the kind of people you want to be successful are actually the ones who are leaving your organization, at the first opportunity, or you're not able to attract them, or you're just not getting that mix right, then watch out. There's something which is going wrong. Something in the whole mix is not quite working. Either your own leadership style is not conducive to the kind of person that you think you are, you want,
Yeah.
or something else. But maybe it's not designed correctly or not incentivized correctly. But there's something definitely which is not working out. So I think for a founder, this internal consistency is really, really important, and it's really, really hard to do because the pulls are so many, and I face it frankly. I know that as a business woman now, I hate saying no to business.
Yeah.
And I have to keep telling myself, but you have to say no to business, because otherwise you can't do good business.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But it's really, really difficult.
So as an entrepreneur who's now said a 50 crore, 100 crore business, how do I determine whether my cultural direction, if I can use that word, is in the right, is taking the right path?
Yeah, I think
should it be an outside evaluation that should be done?
You could do it internally as well. It's up to you. The key question is, a culture promotes some behaviors and inhibits other behaviors. And we see that when we go to another country.
Give me an example.
So like when we are in India, we might see a red light as a suggestion.
Okay.
But when we go to another country, when we see a red light, we're like, okay, it's a firm stop, right?
Yeah.
So each of us takes cues from whichever world we're in on what exactly should we be doing.
Very interesting, yeah.
And in a sense, human beings are very adaptive. We are, and I think Indians are particularly adaptive. Whichever country we're in, we're very quickly to read the signs. Okay, here, this is okay, here, that is not okay. So we'll quickly adapt our behavior to respond to that particular, situation. Exactly the same in organizations. People are very quick to read. Here, this is okay, that's not okay, okay, not okay, whatever. If you are getting the behaviors you need to be successful in your business, you are doing well. If you are not getting the behaviors from the organization which you need to be successful, there's something which you need to see what is going on. So if you have the right culture, the natural behavior of people will be what you want it to be.
I see.
In a sense, it's like it's a socialization. So it is a socialization actually. So if people are
very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, next question that I have is that you've spent a lot of time in strategy, and I think one of the big problems startup entrepreneurs face is they don't define strategy well. What are your thoughts on that?
So I if they're really early stage, I guess it's really hard to, because they themselves are trying to find what's the product market fit, who are they, and it's partly their own journey of evolution of what our strategy is. The reason why I work with business leaders from a strategy perspective is that I find it helps very quickly give in their heads and to our whole piece of work a very strong business and results orientation. So that's the reason why that's my favorite, starting point with organizations. But I completely understand the kind of pulls which entrepreneurs have at the start, because they don't know. They don't know till they are on that, that J-shaped curve of experiencing success and therefore being able to define a strategy which is going to hold for whatever amount of time. Sure. Anyway, today timelines for any strategy, the lifespan is getting shorter and shorter. So that's the bit of a challenge for them.
Very interesting. So moving on, Shalini, you've just written a book,
yes,
The Secret Life of Organizations. I'd like to hear a little bit about this book.
Yeah, so this is written because my kids are graduating.
Okay.
And so the irony is that, I've studied so much about culture, organization, spent my whole life working in it, primarily because I was a slow learner myself. And when I joined the organizational world, I felt I was really, really naive. And I understood people, but understanding people and organizations at that stage is not the same thing at all. So it's been 25 years of working with organizations in some form. And since my kids were graduating, I felt I should put this down on paper, that if you're a young person just entering the organization world, here's something that will help you understand how organizations actually operate, because nobody will tell you that. Nobody will be able to articulate it, even if they know it somewhere. They're operating with those principles at the maybe at a not necessarily at a conscious level, but they're using them. But it's difficult to find people who can articulate all of this for you. So frankly, that's the reason why I wrote the book, to help young people say, okay, what the hell is this that I've got myself into? Right. How can I be successful without even understanding this world that I've entered? So
in your own way of mentoring children, now you're going to be mentoring everyone who reads the book.
Well, I hope so. I still haven't got my kids to read it. I have to say that's turning out to be the biggest challenge.
That I agree with you completely. I mean, I've written books and so many people have read it, but my children haven't.
Oh, okay, fine. So you understand. So my daughter carries it in her bag. So she works for Zomato. So, she's actually living in that world. And she always promises me, yes, I will read. And I say, please, this was written for you.
I agree. So, But tell me, and this is, I'm going to relate to a startup. You've co-authored this book.
Yes.
How important do you think is it to have a co-founder when you are starting a new enterprise?
That is such a good question, and one which I'm still trying to find a good answer to. So the obvious question is, I think, having someone complement you is so important, because each one of us, no matter how great we think we might be, are probably terrible at a million other things. And a business needs so many capabilities to be able to succeed.
Yeah.
Maybe you have it in one person, but what are the odds of that?
Yeah.
So the chances are you don't have it, at least all of them.
Yeah.
And it's just so much better to find a partner who can complement you. Now, having said that, the reality is it's not always easy. One is finding people with the right capabilities, who should then be interested in your business idea and be at the right stage of their life where they, intend to become entrepreneurial. And they should have at least some common underlying, philosophical agreement, values agreement, so that you work well together. And that's incredibly hard to actually find.
Very true.
I'm frankly searching for co-founders to complement me in things I'm not so good at. And so I'm learning about it the hard way myself, trying to find people who will have the skills which I don't think I'm that great at, or at least I would much rather somebody else, focus on some of the other areas so that we can really do well as a team.
I agree. And I guess if you have a co-founder, while it's very critical to have complementarity of skills, going back to our old question, how do you handle complementarity of culture with your co-founder?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, because you both, it's like almost a marriage, It is like a marriage, actually. And just like a husband and wife come from different worlds when they start off, and then somehow have to agree on, sometimes successfully, sometimes not quite so successfully on, okay, so what's going to be the culture of our family? It's really exactly the same, and therefore as hard. So in fact, I reached out to some very successful entrepreneurs as I was starting out, and I said, tell me, founder, no co-founder, what should I do? I think I'm really good at this. I think these are other areas I don't know what to do with. And they were all like, yes, co-founder, except one who said absolutely no co-founder, which was another story. This entrepreneur had just ended a partnership, and therefore it was like almost going through a divorce, so it had such a painful experience that this entrepreneur said, no, absolutely not. If you can do it by yourself, you do it. But most of them would advise you for the same reason, and yet they'll tell you it's as hard as marriage.
That's true.
Which is a big deal, right?
That's true. I agree with you. So, given the kind of work you've done over the last 25 years and raised great kids, had a strong home, how have you managed work-life balance?
So I was really young when I started out. So I was 20 when I went to Ahmedabad, 22 when I graduated. In fact, I wasn't even 22 when I graduated. I was still 21 and a half. And I got married within a year of graduating. So I had a very strong nurturing instinct. I wanted to raise a family. In my own mind, I always had the 2 kids, 1 dog, I think probably it's a socialization by advertising, but whatever. I always had that very strong desire to raise a family and be a mom. And I used to, and I'm going back to early 20s, how I used to think. I used to think that if I can't do this well in my own family, it's the same thing. How do we help people reach their potential? How do we help people, be really good at what they're doing? Then it's not going to be like, how am I talking about this in other places? So in my own mind, I had for many, many years said, okay, the kids have to grow up really well and I have to somehow design my life around that, which required a tremendous amount of creativity, to be honest, because it doesn't, back in the day, there wasn't even the idea of flexible hours. Those concepts hadn't as yet entered the organizational world, nor was there any consciousness of the fact that organizations should help women, manage the two. Like, none of these ideas existed. So some of the creative ways in which I worked with this was, I had a version of Infinity when my kids were just born, actually, for 2.5 years. That gave me some flexibility. It was very stressful as well, but it gave me some flexibility. So when my son was just 10 days old, I did a workshop with the Aya and him in the outside room. So you can imagine what a crazy experience it was. So for me, it was a very big challenge because I had 2 very strong pulls. My instinct to build a family, kids, was as strong as my desire to be great at this profession. And it required a lot of creativity, a lot of persistence, I think. A lot of persistence that, okay, it'll somehow all work out eventually.
I have a lot of admiration for women because of the way they just multitask and manage so many different things.
It is so much harder, I can tell you, that now when my kids are grown up and I don't have family, in that sense, they're no kids, they're all in their 20s. And I'm working in a sense like a man, in the sense that, I'm not worried about this or that. I realized, this is so simple. What is there? This is the easy part of life. Because I've spent years trying to find, how will I pick up school, this homework, that test, this project, this proposal. It's just been so difficult.
I agree. No, full marks to you.
Well,
Okay, so just a couple of more questions. I ask this to all our guests because I think it's important for us to talk about some failures. What are your biggest learnings from your biggest failures?
So it won't be like an incident, but it'll tell you things that I have generally. I think one of my biggest failures has been across many years of experience, having a harder time putting my perspective across. And this has been a very unnatural skill for me because my own natural style has been very, okay, I listen. I'm a great listener and, I can hear you speak a lot. But it's been very hard for me to find a style which says, yes, but this is what I think about something. And that's been an acquired skill. The inability to do that for many years in many roles, not one, while knowing it's so important, but still being unable to do, I think has been a big drawback. I think it's reduced my effectiveness in many roles, as if I had been more able to more clearly state my perspective.
Very interesting. So last question, Shalini. You've seen so many startups, you've nurtured them, you've done your own. What would your advice be to a young startup entrepreneur?
Go for it. So, okay, I'll tell you what, when I was thinking of, should I become an entrepreneur or not, one of the first things I did was, because I wear a research hat half of the time, I did a interview or research with many recent entrepreneurs, like the 3 to 5 year old startups. And one of the things I was blown away by was just how confident young entrepreneurs who'd accomplished something, some level of, because they've gotten a couple of rounds of funding, so okay, at that stage, were. And I was like, I am here in my 40s and I'm still like wondering, should I say X, should I say Y? And you're like, okay, this is it and this is the world. So I realized that when we look at people who are growing up in the corporate world, because in the corporate world, for instance, or any other organizational world, not just corporate, non-corporate as well, you're always, not always, but very often evaluating what to say based on what response your boss's boss, you're sort of tying it in with, will this work, will this not work, should I say this, should I not say this, that you don't necessarily question, so what do I think? Or you don't develop that idea enough, even if you know, okay, I think that, but how would I play this out further? And I think that experience of having something of your own, because there's nobody whom you can, now there's no referent, right? You only have to take all those decisions on your own, and you have to find therefore your own set of answers to, I think it's a great opportunity to discover, grow, and of course if you're successful, it's financially very rewarding as well. But I'm saying even keeping that aside, but just as a learning growth experience. And I think it's a humbling experience in many ways.
That is true.
It's very humbling. Like, I don't think you can have being a good entrepreneur and having a big ego. I mean, I know there are entrepreneurs with big egos, but at least on a day-to-day basis, they don't live together. You have to keep saying, am I doing the right thing? What should I do better? How can I be better? There's a humility you need to be successful. So I say go for it.
I agree with you. Shalini, thank you very much for being on our show. Your words of wisdom, your knowledge, I think everyone who listens to you is going to really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ashutosh.
Thank you again
Thank you
very
so
much.
much for having me over. Loved it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You podcast. Be sure to visit tbcy.in to join the conversation, access show notes, and discover fantastic bonus content. You can follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Simply search for The Brand Called You. Thank you and see you next week.